Adobe Fresco is basically Photoshop and Illustrator's weird baby with some wild built-in motion features. I also use it for 90% of my work as a professional illustrator. Here's everything you need to know to get started using it. So when you first open up Fresco, you're welcomed by the home screen. Here you'll see your recent projects. If you're in for the first time, you're not going to see those. But you can start a new document at the top by choosing one of those random sizes. You can go to the bottom left corner and import a PSD file. An important thing to remember is that Fresco files actually are Photoshop files, which is super handy. It also means that you can use any Photoshop brush in Fresco, but I'll get to that later. So if you wanted to import a PSD, you could go to Import and Open and then find the PSD wherever you have it saved. If you want to do something new, you go to Create New, and then you've got your recent documents that you've used. And then there's presets built in for digital things, print, and there's also social media presets, which is pretty handy. The default view is your recent projects, but you can also click over on the left to your files. And this is, you can find everything in here. It won't just be your most recent stuff. You can make folders, put all that stuff in there. To make a new folder, you would just hit this new folder at the top right. Then you can name it, and then you can select and drag things to move them in there. To select projects, you would just hit the select button, and then you can select one or as many as you want. And then you would just go to move at the bottom and put them wherever you want to put them. Obviously, there's a lot more stuff on the homepage, but this is a quick setup video, so you can deep dive at a different point. So let's open up a new document and get into the interface. So at the top, you will see your document name. If you want to change that, highly recommend it. If you want to find things later, you can tap on that and then you can just type whatever you want. Over on the left, you will have your tools. Over on the right, you will have layers and other different kinds of layer settings, controls. At the top, you've got your settings, you've got your export, publish and export, how to quickly save your image, more about that later. The next option is if you want to share a document with someone else who's using Fresco, and this is undo and this is redo. And then over on the right, you've got these little arrows to just go full screen if you want to not see all of the other stuff. And then at the top left, you've got your home, which will just bring you back to the page we were at before. Because this is a drawing app, let's talk about the drawing tools first. What's unique about Fresco is it has both pixel-based brushes and vector brushes. Vector is infinitely scalable. In addition to pixel and vector brushes, Fresco also has these really cool live brushes, and these are watercolor and oil brushes that emulate real-life things where the watercolors stay wet and the oil stays oily. You can explore those if you want to. You will notice little icons to show you the differences between them. The first one is pixel. You'll see the little dots showing it's a pixel brush. When you select this, you've got all these different options for brushes. I have other ones added in here, but you will see lots of different options that are default. You can also go to add brushes and then go to discover new brushes, and then there's all of these brushes immediately available to add to Fresco. Fresco in the past year became completely free. There's no pro version or anything like that, so you have access to all of this in any version of Fresco, which is super great because most of these were brushes that were designed by Cal Webster, who is an amazing brush magician. So highly recommend playing around with those and finding the brushes that work best for you. And as I mentioned, you can get any Photoshop brushes you want, like my Retro Spico set, and add them in the same way. You would just go to plus add brushes and then import from files, and you would just import them there. So when you choose a brush that's a pixel brush and you start drawing, you're drawing here, everything is great. You can pinch to zoom in and out. You can rotate your canvas with your fingers. It's pretty handy. I highly recommend coming into your settings, app settings, and then go to input and then put your touch to gestures only so you don't accidentally start making marks and doing stuff like that. Now, if you selected the vector brush, which when you roll over, it'll show you selected vector brushes. If you start drawing, it's going to immediately make a new layer, and you'll see that layer over on the right side is labeled with vector. That is because vector and pixel cannot exist on the same layer. They live in different realities and work completely different ways. And Fresco will separate it automatically for you. So if we go back to the pixel brush and start drawing, you'll see it's automatically going to happen on that pixel-based layer. I'm not going to show you too much with the live brushes, but let me just come in here and go. I'm not going to show you too much with the live brushes, but just to get a feel, we come in here with a watercolor brush. We got wet ink. Couple quick things I want to touch on with the brushes. There is a little quick menu, I think it's called. It's this thing down here. You can move this wherever you want, but this is a quick thing where you can change the size of your brushes. That's what that number is. You can make it huge or you can make it tiny. Down here is your flow. It's like the opacity pretty much. I don't really mess with that. And then this is the smoothing. Smoothing is one of my favorite things about Fresco because it's independent of the brush settings. So any brush you're using, you can turn smoothing up or down. Smoothing works a little bit differently in Fresco. So when you have it maxed out at 100%, it's gonna look like a little bit of a lag when you're drawing. And that is because it's completely cleaning up and correcting your line as you draw. You can dial it into wherever you want, but when I'm sketching, I usually have it really low, so there's just immediate reaction time. And then if I'm like doing tightened up line work, I'll bring the smoothing up to just make things easier. Below that is the paint inside. Paint inside allows you to draw within whatever is on your artboard. It's sort of like lock transparency. Below that, you have your brush settings where you can sort of fine tune things if you are into that sort of thing. But that would be a whole video on its own. The ability to have pixel-based brushes like Procreate or Photoshop and Vector all in one app is one of my favorite parts about Adobe Fresco. When I need to work in vector artwork, I can still do my sketching on its own layer, and then once that's dialed in, switch right over to the vector brushes and then draw right on top of my sketch with infinitely scalable vector art. Look at that, doesn't lose any quality. Pretty cool. Let's do a quick rapid fire through all the different tools on the toolbar. Next up is the eraser. Eraser is pretty straightforward. You erase things. Underneath the eraser, you've got some different options for different kinds of erasers, but stick around because I'm going to give you a pro tip on tell you why I never use the eraser tool at all. And it's not because I don't make mistakes. I make lots of mistakes. Underneath that is the smudge tool. Smudge tool is kind of cool for blending things together, but you can choose any one of your brushes and just you can kind of smudge stuff. It's like using your finger. Underneath that is the select tool, the transform tool, if you will. So transform tool is how you would move whatever is on that layer. You could also use the skew to, like, you know, warp it that way. The distort does the same things. These are all just different ways to distort it. And then underneath that, you will have the Liquify, which gives you some fun tools to sort of just like push your art around and do, you know, all kinds of weird stuff. There's the reconstruct button or brush, and what that does is it starts to like bring it back to where it originally was in kind of a weird way. And then you also have your size here, just like you do with the brushes. But as you can see, I'm reconstructing it back to where it was when we started. There's some different options here. You can play around with them. Underneath that is your selection tools. You'll notice when a tool has a little arrow in the bottom right corner, it means there's more stuff underneath it. And here we've got the lasso. The lasso allows you to draw around something to select it. And you'll see when it's got these little marching ants, it's selected. And when it's selected, we have this transform thing where we can move that on its own. You could also erase it, turn it into a mask, like a layer mask, which is, if you don't know what that is right now, that's another video. And then we got some more things. We could invert the selection if you want to select everything else. And the rest of these are just different ways to make selections. I like the lasso a lot because it allows you to like tap points, but then also draw. So like if you had some like broad areas you wanted to select, like I could just do these big points, but then I wanted to get like more precise here, I could like kind of draw in closely, and that's pretty cool. And you can also add in more to your selection. You could just keep selecting until you're satisfied. The magic wand is also a useful one. This one will select like the whatever is constrained by the walls of a drawing. And you'll notice this thing called the color margin. What this does is it allows you to select the strength. So as I pull it up higher, you'll see it starting to like move out of that shape. And that is because it's like a pencil line, so it's not that, it's porous. So you would want to get it to the point where it is selecting the area you want, and as high as it'll go, that will give you the closest possible selection that you are looking for. The paint selection is like a select where you paint, and then there's like the shape ones, all just ways to select things. Below that is your paint bucket or paint bill. This, you just choose whatever color you want, and then you can fill in an area. You'll notice here, this one also has a color margin. With this one, you'll see as I pull it higher, it starts to go through the entire image. Again, it has to do with the porous line of that pencil brush. So you'll see down here, I have this really solid line that I drew that is nowhere near as porous as the pencil line. So if I fill in this spot, I can bring that color margin all the way up to the max and it's not gonna break out of that area. But if I go and tap on this pencil layer, you'll see it goes completely out of there, and I would just have to bring this down until it doesn't break out of that shape. And you can see it, because that line is so thin, it's hard to keep it all in there, because like you can really see all those spaces where it's getting out. So generally, using the paint bucket on a very thin pencil line is not going to give you the best results. Below that is the shapes tool. Yours isn't going to look like this if you're starting Fresco. I've got a bunch of shapes libraries that I made. They just happen to be available in my shop. The video's not about that. But shapes are actually a tool that I ignored for a long time, and they're very powerful when you make your own shapes because it can be vector, which is pretty cool. So it's a way to bring in vector art that you couldn't necessarily do. For example, my vector textures, like this right here. With this texture, I can go to fill. For example, this texture, if I go on a new layer and hit fill, it's going to give me the option to fill it in as vector. And now I have this vector texture that is infinitely scalable. So that is pretty neat. But the default shape options will have some like these comic ones or some other stuff. You can hit plus to find some more that are built in. They're a little bit limited. You can make your own. I have videos on that, which I will link below. But I use this for all kinds of things like lettering grids, just ample skulls, anything you want. And you can immediately have that as a vector graphic in your artboard. Pretty cool. Below that is your text tool. It's the same as any other text tool in a drawing app. You just tap and you start typing and your settings are over here. If you want to add in a font, when you go to your text, you would just go to plus, and then you can add more either from Adobe or from your own files if you have a font that you want to load. Below that is the eyedropper tool. This just allows you to select a color on your screen. You can also access the eyedropper tool by just touching and holding, and that becomes an eyedropper tool as well. Below that is the add image. You can add an image from your Photos app or wherever from a file. There's also a really cool thing called elements, which is all these sort of built-in things that you can add into your file, like this grain one. Sometimes these will take a minute to download because they're high-res graphics, but they're just, you know, some cool grain that you can add into your images. It's not just grain. There's all different kinds of textures. There's gradients, there's halftones, there's landscapes, metallic, all kinds of stuff that you can play around with. And they're all optimized and ready and set up in a way that they just like kind of work well with your image. Put this down here. Look at that. That's pretty cool, right? The last thing on here is color. You just tap that and then you can choose whatever color you want. You've got the color wheel, or you can choose sliders or recents, or if you have swatches saved. If you import an image, it'll automatically generate a color palette from that image. So if you have an illustration or something that you've done or something you're inspired by and you want to work with that color palette, you just open it up and then you will see this image thing, the image name, and then you will see the colors from that. So this is from that paper texture. Pretty neat. If you're familiar with other apps like Procreate, Photoshop, or any other drawing apps, you'll know about layers. The top thing over here is your layers, and these are the layers in your document. There's little icons next to your layers that will give you a hint of what the layer is. You'll see that these two layers have photos on them because these are both things that were placed from the add image. This one down here is the paper texture that we added in before. You'll notice there's this little eye. I tapped on that. That's how you turn a layer on and off. And then this one is just a little graphic that I made and I imported it back into my file. So let's say I wanted to edit this in Fresco. I need to change this to a pixel layer that I can work with. So if I tap on this layer, you'll see this little layer menu come in and I can just go to convert to pixel layer. And now it'll work like any other layer. If it was a photo layer, I wouldn't be able to manipulate it in the same sort of ways. I wouldn't be able to like draw on it or select things. It would just be treated as a static thing. One bonus tip, when you place a photo layer, you are allowed to put it outside of your artboard, which is pretty handy if you are using something as like an image reference. But once you convert it to a pixel layer, you see it's gone because it's moved out of the artboard, so it doesn't exist anymore. So handy, the first part, not the second part. Also in your settings, if that doesn't work for you or you want to turn it off, that's what this artboard preview is. So if we check that on, you'll see our artboard is previewing with it's hiding outside of it. To add a new layer, you can hit this plus thing and that'll just make a new layer. This layer below that is the clipping mask layer. So that will clip whatever's in that layer to the layer below it. So for example, if on this layer, we have this orange shape, and then I made a layer on top of that and I drew this squiggly line. If I go to clipping mask, it's only gonna show up within that square, and you can use the transform tool to move that around. But that is how clipping masks work. They just show up in what is in the layer below. And you could do that with a folder as well. Speaking of folders, you can make a folder by just combining things together by selecting them and dragging them onto top of each other. And then you've got a folder. You can go in and out of the folder by tapping it and then using the arrow to get back out of it. Underneath that, you will see the appearance. These are just sort of adjustments you can do. For example, if we wanted to play around with the color without changing it with the paint bucket here, we could go to hue saturation and we could play around with that and get it to a spot that we like. One handy thing is you can combine that with a clipping mask. For example, if I turn this layer below back on, you will see that it's also changing the color of my original artwork. But if I just wanted to change the color of that orange rectangle, we could make that adjustment a clipping mask, and now it's only going to be applied to that one thing. If you decide you like this new pink color and you don't want to have the complication of this like clipping mask situation, you could just go to tap on that and go to merge down, and now your orange square is just permanently a pink one. We could do a whole video on the different layer properties and blend modes, but because it's a quick setup, we're just going to do a quick little thing. So blend mode is how the layers interact with each other. Normal is just, like this, them stacked on top of each other. You can't see through it unless your artwork is translucent. And then you can just play around with the different ones. Multiply lets the layer below come through it. To be honest, I've been using this app and apps that have layers properties for my entire career, which has been like 20 years. And then even before that, when I was, learning this stuff, I still don't know exactly what all these mean. And I will just be kind of tapping through and finding the one that works best for the current application. So that's sort of what you can do. I will say that I often use multiply and overlay because one application for me for using these kind of things is with a texture. So for example, this paper texture, which is down below and we can't see it, if we want to reorder them, I could just drag this up to the top. And now since we can't see it, what I want is to make this texture appear over my art. So what I'm gonna do is go to blend mode and change this to multiply. And now that texture is overlaid on the art, and that is the way that it uses. Multiply is a good one, and also overlay, which, is similar, but for some situations that will work better. Sometimes multiply will work better. You gotta experiment with what works best for what you're trying to do. Below your layer properties, you will see precision, and this is where you'll find snapping settings, grids, the symmetry. You could do perspective grids from an image. If you want grids, you can turn them on and then you can control the spacing and all that stuff there. You could turn on symmetry, and you've got all different kinds of symmetry. There's regular reflective symmetry where you just draw on one side and it goes on both sides. There's like the same thing but vertical. There's like this corner option. There's lots of different ways you can use symmetry, and it gets pretty crazy and it's kind of fun. None of that. We just made a beautiful flower, and you look at it, how many of these things are. There's also rotational ones. There's so many different things. You can also change the center point of your symmetry as well. For example, if you have a full scene and you want to use symmetry on like something in the scene, and you want it like in the corner down here, you just go to move, and then you can drag like this, and then you could also like rotate it. And then when you start drawing, you'll see, you know, it changes where it is. And if you wanted to move over here, right? Pretty cool. Next thing I want to talk about is one of my favorite things in Adobe Fresco, and that is this little circle over here. This is called the Modifier tool. You can drag it wherever you want. I tend to keep mine down here. Modifier does lots of different things. I have a full video on different ways you can use it, but I'm just gonna go over a couple in this video that are handy right away when you're first starting. So if you are drawing with a brush, this is probably the way I use it the absolute most, and it's got this like texture to it, then we come over here and try to erase, you get that like clean edge, which doesn't match how we're drawing. If instead you just stay on the brush, you could double tap this modifier and you can erase with that pencil brush. So this works with any brush you're using and helps you maintain that same texture. You don't have to double tap to use it. You could also just be drawing and then hold it. And while you're holding it, it's an eraser. So you could like draw and then hold, erase, draw, erase, draw, erase, whatever works best for you. The modifier gains a superpower when you're working in vector brushes. If you draw a line and then draw some more lines, you could double tap and use it like an eraser, just like we did before. But if you tap it again and get that blue circle on the outside, this brings us into vector trimming mode. In vector trimming mode, we can just cross out anything where lines intersect. So we can just go like this, boom, clean that right up. Look at that. Look at how sharp those corners are. Love that feature. You can also use it to select multiple layers. So if I select this layer, double tap the modifier, I can grab all three of these. And then if I wanted to put them in a folder, that's a fast way to do it. Then one more cool thing is the multicolor swatch. So let's say you have something like this, and there's another color like this. As I mentioned, you can activate the eyedropper by just holding to do that. But if you double tap the modifier and do that, you'll see we are getting a multicolor swatch involved. And you could zoom out and sort of dial that in to however you want it to be. For example, if we just go to a very simple brush, you can see we've got this cool effect happening. Almost gives you like a 3-line quality, which is pretty neat. You could also use it like a stamp too. For example, if we eyedroppered this whole shape and then we choose the hard round brush and we could just sort of like tap and we get this thing everywhere. Boop, boop, boop. Pretty cool. All right, the last thing I want to talk about is the motion tools, because I think they might blow your mind if you don't know anything about them. A lot of drawing apps have frame by frame animation like Procreate, and how that works is you draw stuff on your layers and then you can have them rotate between those frames. One of the things that makes Fresco special in this regard is that each layer gets its own timeline, so you can just add in a bunch of stuff as you go. For example, if I draw this circle here, if I click down at the bottom, we've got this little timeline thing happening, which you may have seen in other apps like the Animation Assist or a timeline in Photoshop. And you just tap here to add in a new frame, and you'll see it defaults to having the onion skin, which is the color for the previous and next frame, so you can see what you're doing. And then if I draw this right here, we've got a little animation. I can come down here, do it again. I put this over here, do another one. Now we've got this thing moving around, which is pretty cool. We do a new layer. On this layer, we've got this little circle up here. We could just do this, and this is totally separate from the other layer. And the cool thing about this is you can make things move at like different speeds, which will, you know, give it make it more dynamic because you have stuff moving at like different rates, right? That's not the only thing that makes Fresco's motion tools pretty sick. Watch this, ready? Draw this dumb little, this is a very good drawing. We hit this path button here and there is presets, and we could just immediately start making our drawing do stuff. You can play around with all this stuff. You can also control them too. For example, we got this sway thing, we got the bob. Let's say I like what's happening here, but I don't want it to rotate so much. I can pull that angle back in, so it's just sort of going up and down. You can control the speed by this frames option. So if you want it to go faster, you remove frames. If you want it to go real slow, you add in lots of frames. You can think of it as like extending the same movement over frames in time. If you have the same time period and there's more frames, the movement is going to happen slower over the same, but if there's less, it's going to look faster. It's not a physics lesson, okay? So those are those presets. Aside from the presets, we can draw our own path. We click on path I just draw a line. This thing is moving along that line. And again, we can control the speed of how fast it does it. There's all kinds of things we can do. We can add multiples, we can scatter them, we could fade in and out, we can ease in and out where it changes the speed a little bit, we can randomize it, all kinds of stuff with the path. You can also draw the speed you want this thing to travel. For example, I could come in here and be like, I want it to go real fast down and then slow and then around and then slow and then pew out of the screen. And to activate that, you just come to your speed options in this little menu and we go to original speed. And now you'll see, pew, it is traveling at the speed that I drew it, which is pretty cool. You could also align to the path and that looks even better. Look at that. Can you believe it? The next one is, I think, one of the coolest features around, and it makes it so easy to do really dynamic things. I feel like I'm in an infomercial, but I'm not. I don't even have an Adobe affiliate link below, okay? You ready for this? Let's just draw something here. Let's draw an eyeball with some veins. Is that what they are? Hanging off the back. It'll go like this. Boop, boop, boop. That's our eyeball. I'm gonna make a new frame, and I'm gonna do the same eyeball, but this time I'm gonna extend these things out. Pretty neat. And then I'll do another one, and then I'll just have them like in more like this. Like they're kicking, like the eyeball is swimming. It's a swimming eyeball if that's what's happening here. Well, let's play that. There we go. Exactly what I wanted. After this, path. Draw a path. Now our eyeball is swimming through the scene. And you're like, that's pretty cool. I like that. But let's do like a grow shrink on it. So it's like getting a little bit smaller. So it's kind of look like it's going in the distance. That's pretty cool. Let's add more of them and, scatter them. And they're just, eyeballs going through the scene. Like that's cool and all, but I really wanted there to be more. I'll draw another path. What about a wiggly path? Oh, another wiggly path, and then another path, and then another path, and then another path, another path, a shorter path, but then a longer path, crazy wiggle path. And then this one, and then like one in the middle like that, and then this one, and that one, and this one, and that one, and this one, and that one. So to recap, Fresco superpowers are pixel plus vector and motion. If you want to go deeper, I got a whole Fresco playlist waiting for you right over here. You can just click on this and deep dive. Deep dive. All right, good talk. I'll see you real soon. High five.